the Jewish roots. So we're in the pre-Christian era. So you put on your pre-Christian perspective goggles. The earliest, even just hints. So not well thought out, written, established theories. No, just hints of it, of the idea of purgatory. We already brushed on with 2nd Maccabees. This was a Jewish text written in the 2nd century. It describes Judas Maccabeus offering sacrifice for fallen soldiers so that their sins might be forgiven. It suggests a belief in an intermediate state where the dead could benefit from the prayers of the living. Some Jewish tradition also held beliefs in post-mortem purification, which likely influenced early Christian thought. Another note on this is that this was not specific to the Jewish and the Christian world. The Jewish now, but the Christian later. Like most things, it's not special. These ideas were held by other cultures. Egyptian culture had very similar concepts. They had post-mortem traditions that interacted with the afterlife. Like, this was not a new thing. This is not something the Jewish people made up. This is not something certainly the Christian people a very long time later made up. It just isn't. These are culturally known across a variety of cultures and across a variety of religions, obviously with that. Early Christian thought. So now we've jumped timeline quite a bit. 1st to 5th century. This is the Christian boom. So this is when theologians are becoming a thing. This is obviously post-Christ. This is when everything starts to happen. A lot of the stuff that we've been talking about recently. So like the boom of Gnosticism is here. The very early stages of the Roman Catholic movement is here. This is when all of this starts to really take. Marcion is here. Like, all of these things are kind of held within this 1 to 5 range. The New Testament does not explicitly mention purgatory. In fact, the Bible as a whole does not explicitly mention purgatory at all. But passages such as 1 Corinthians 3:11-15, which we read, the purification of fire, testing a person's works, which later theologians then linked to the idea of purgatory. Early church fathers like Tertullian, who I've been mentioning a lot recently because of all this stuff we've been talking about, your timeline range would be about 155 to 240 AD somewhere. And then Origen, who I've also mentioned a lot recently, 185 to 254-ish. They discussed ideas of this post-death purification process. These were some of the same people, Origen specifically, who were at the same time trying to destroy other views of Christianity. These are the same guys who were like, the easiest, best example would be the Gnostics. They were demonizing in real time all Gnostic thought, all Gnostic tradition, all of that theology, while formulating their own. And purification as a process post-death was one of those things. I just find it kind of ironic. Augustine would be roughly 354 to 430 AD, also mentions a purification or a purifying fire, like Paul mentioned, for some souls, and encourage prayer for the dead, reinforcing that idea of a state in between, of something that is akin to purgatory. After this, you have the medieval development. This would be from like the 6th century to the 12th century. By the early medieval period, the concept of purgatory became more structured. So it's now more than seeds. Tertullian, Augustine, Origen planted the seeds that later grew into this. The term purgatorium began to be used in the Latin Church, so truly taking root and then flourishing. Gregory the Great, which would be 540 to 604 AD, wrote about a temporary place of purification for souls before heaven, and his teachings influenced later doctrine. By the 12th century, theologians like Peter Lombard and Thomas Aquinas further refined the idea, describing purgatory as a place of cleansing fire. So they're pulling from that 1 Corinthians verse. Just like everything else, we have, in some cases like purgatory, a little snippet of a verse. And it later, over time, grows into something astronomically bigger than what it was. Official doctrine in Catholic Church, this is when it's completely taken root and is absolutely flourishing between the 13th and the 16th century. The doctrine of purgatory was officially defined at the Second Council of Leon in 1274 and reaffirmed at the Council of Florence in 1439. The Catholic Church taught that prayers, indulgences, this is for David, when you were mentioning, I figure sarcastically, but the buying and selling of spiritual things, I guess you say, indulgences were sold by the Catholic Church. This is just a fact. It's not a pretty fact, but it's fact. So prayers, indulgences, and masses for the dead could help souls in purgatory. The sale of indulgences, pardons to reduce time in purgatory, became controversial, leading to the Protestant Reformation. And then you had the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, where Martin Luther between 1483 and 1546 and other reformers rejected purgatory outright, arguing that Christ's atonement was sufficient. So Ruth, there you go. Christ's atonement was sufficient and that there was no biblical basis for the teaching, because there really isn't. The Council of Trent in 1545 to 1563 reaffirmed purgatory as Catholic doctrine, rejecting Protestant objections. Modern Catholic understanding, to finish the timeline, the modern Catholic understanding. The Catholic Church still holds on to the idea of purgatory, but in some senses has moved away from the over-literal depiction of it as a fiery place. If you look up, like I did, and I put some pictures up here throughout, but almost all of the artists' renditions of purgatory, it looks like hell. Straight up. I don't see any differentiation between what is depicted as purgatory and just absolute hell. The literal artistic version of hell. It is now often described as a spiritual purification rather than a specific location. So not somewhere you go, but something you go through. The concept remains controversial among Christian denominations, with Protestants largely rejecting it, while Catholics maintain it as a part of their tradition.